Hello, my name is Rachel Peters and I am the concertmaster at Opera in the Ozarks. And today we are going to go over some tips and tricks for how to prepare for Arkansas's All-State Orchestra audition on violin. Now before we begin, I would like to encourage you to utilize your resources. If you have questions about any fingerings or bowings, I highly recommend altering the playback speed on this video that you're watching so that you can write down fingerings in your own music. 0.25x and 0.50x are going to be slower than the normal playback speed so that you can view the videos in slow motion and see what's happening. So first I'm going to go over the etudes for All-State. The first etude I'm going to go over is the Mazza's etude number 8. And for both of the etudes, I'm just going to play a couple of lines of each etude so that you can get an idea for what your audition panel might be looking for. So for Mazza's etude number 8, I would say that your primary points that you want to focus on when you're practicing are going to be your accidental notes and your dynamics and smooth shifting. So at the beginning, we are in the key of E minor and we modulate to E major later on. So we have a lot of sharps that are written into the part that don't necessarily go with the key signature at the beginning. Now, as you're preparing for your audition, I would also encourage you to make sure that you follow the DS fine, right? So once we get to the end of the piece, we go back to the DS, the sign, which is back at the beginning of the first full measure where the B begins, the sign that's the S with the slash and the 2 dots. And then we end the song right before the 4 sharps, the dol cantabile, about 6 lines down from the beginning of the page. So to give you an idea of what this sounds like, I'll start from the beginning of Mazza's etude number 8. So I'm going to stop there for the moment for this etude. So one point that I would like to bring across to you is that we don't have a dynamic indicated at the beginning. So I would just play it whatever dynamic you feel most comfortable starting with an accented up bow. But I would take note that there's no, there's the andante espressivo tempo indicated at the beginning. And then after the fine, we have at the 4 sharps dolce cantabile. So I think it would be safe for you to do 2 slightly different tempos when you get both at the beginning and to the dolce cantabile. I think that if you're going to change the tempi, if you feel like you need more time in the 4 sharp section, that you should take more time there versus at the beginning. But please be sure to make sure that you are, especially doing the swells, the crescendos, and the decrescendos. I think that's going to, paying attention to that and paying attention to all the accidentals are going to be the way that you are successful in etude number 8. Now for Wolfart Etude number 12, I think that you're going to have two objectives here, and a third objective to help you be successful in the first two. So the first objective is going to be that you're playing in the key of E flat major. So we have to make sure that we are consistently looking for our B flats, E flats, and A flats that are indicated in the key signature. And the second thing that you're going to want to especially look for is the speed. Now the quarter note, dotted quarter note is indicated at the speed of 100, so it's going to be quite fast. So your third objective that should help you with objective number 2 is making sure that you're using a very condensed amount of bow, a very small amount of bow, possibly in the middle. I would recommend playing in the middle rather than the tip or the frog, because it goes too fast for you to really think about using a lot of bow in the other spot. When you're at the tip, the motion happens too fast. So try to see if you can stay in the middle of the bow from the beginning. So that's the speed that you're going to be wanting to look at. In this edition, there are a number of fourth fingers marked. I would not be afraid of them by any means. They're just there to remind you that you're not playing an open string there. You have to play a lowered fourth finger for the A flat or the E flat. So there's no shifting. This is all in first position. So just be aware that when you're seeing all of the fours fingered, that you are staying in first position. It's just to make sure that we're not playing because that sounds quite weird, right? We're going to make sure that we have low fourth finger. So with that in mind, let's go ahead on to our excerpts. And I have two recommendations to give to you for our first excerpt, Symphony number 5 in C minor, opus 67. So the first recommendation that I can give to you is that in this movement, the orchestra is homorhythmic. Homorhythmic means that everyone is playing the same rhythm at the same time. So with that in mind, you're going to want to make sure that you are really locking in with the metronome, practicing this slowly with the metronome so that you have a consistent sense of time from the beginning to the end of the excerpt. My tip number 2 is making sure that you're listening to a recording of this piece to try to hear your part line up with the winds and brass. This mostly has to do with the chords that are at the beginning, the double stops and the triple stops. When you're playing all of the notes, when multiple notes are present, you want to make sure that all of the notes are speaking at the same time. So I know sometimes when we're playing double stops that the tendency is to break up the chords like this, but we want to make sure that we have all notes speaking at the same time. So the beginning sounds like this. So it's really important to make sure that we are in the lower half of the bow so that we can play all of these chords down bow, because we're supposed to be matching with the sound of the trumpet and all of the brass. Or if you want to pick another instrument to line up with, I would think of listening to the mallet of a timpani, tum, 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 right? It's not a very long sound. It's a very short and crisp sound. When we get to measure 587, 588, we have the same pattern of the scale starting from 587, and I would recommend making sure that rather than staying in second position for this, that we are shifting up and down so that the pattern stays the same when we get to measure 590, where we have these grace notes. So just keep that in mind when you're starting at 587. So with that in mind, I'll play the excerpt from the beginning. So that is how the Beethoven excerpt sounds. That should be at half note equals 84. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if that feels overwhelming, try to start at a slower metronome marking. I would recommend starting around 45 or 50 and then incrementally increasing the tempo so that you feel more comfortable with the speed. When in doubt, use less bow. So let's go on to the second excerpt, the Hebrides Overture, Opus 26 by Felix Mendelssohn. I have 2 tips for this excerpt being successful. The first tip that I have is making sure that you have a consistent fingering for sequences. Similar to the Beethoven, you're going to want to apply something similar here, but in a different fashion. So when we get to measure 9, I would recommend using the same fingering there that you do at measure 11 if possible. So it sounds something like this, where you start on the 4th finger. And then when you get to measure 11, making sure you still start on the 4th finger. And then switching to a different position for measure 13. I would go to 1st here. I'm not playing the correct bowings right now. I'm just showing you the fingers in slow motion so that you get the idea of, if the material is the same but with different notes, try to use the same fingerings if possible. The second point that I would make for this excerpt, I think how this excerpt varies from the other excerpts that you have, is that it has the most variation in your range of dynamics. You know, we have measures that go from forte to piano or from fortissimo to pianissimo. So make sure that we're very drastically going from loud to soft. And this excerpt is at quarter note equals 100. So let's see what that sounds like. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you don't feel like you can play these up to tempo, I would highly recommend just making sure that if you feel like you can't play consistently at the same speed up to tempo, that you take a slower tempo and just make sure that your speed is consistent. That goes for all of the excerpts. So starting from the beginning. So we don't have as much dynamic variation in our second excerpt of the Hebrides Overture, starting from letter H. So your main tip that you're going to want to keep in mind for this one is making sure that we have organized all of those accidentals. So no matter what fingerings you choose, make sure that you have a clear sense of what notes that you're playing. Now, this section is in the key of B minor. So I would practice a B minor scale if possible. So there's some notes that you can keep in mind there. One thing that I did not do successfully when I was playing through that was my fingering at measure 249. So I'll do that again so that you can see that. I'm going to go from, in this beat 3 of measure 249, I'm going up to 1 on G so that I can play this C major scale sequence all in the same position. So that you stay all in the same position so that we don't have to do a lot of shifting back and forth. You can do it in first position, it just will require you to move your elbow up and down quite a bit. And we want this to feel as easy as possible, so I would recommend going up to the higher position in measure 249. So keep that in mind as you're practicing this excerpt. Also keep in mind that these 16th notes do not have dots. So we want everything to sound pretty connected if possible. So let's go on to our next excerpt, our final excerpt, which is Dvorak Symphony No. 8. Like the Beethoven, the beginning of it starts homorhythmically, and we have the same situation with the chorus where we want all of the notes of the chord to speak at the same time. We're altering in a number of keys in this section, so you're going to want to keep track of your accidentals and try to see if you can play everything in time. So let's try this from the beginning. Hardest part about this excerpt for violins is the high C that we have at the end. So if you want to make sure you are practicing your shifting consistently, one thing that I would recommend is making sure that you bring your elbow around before you are reaching for the high note. If you're unsure of how to do that, but also making sure that your thumb stays at this part of the fingerboard so that you can better memorize how high up your hand needs to go in relation to your violin. I hope that these tips were helpful for you, so now I would like to dive into some general tips for preparing for all states. So the first thing I want to talk about is access to sheet music. I know that there is a lot of stress around making sure that you have the correct sheet music for the audition, and I would like to introduce you to my favorite resource, which is called imslp.org. also known as the Petrucci Music Library. It is a wonderful resource where you can access PDFs of your etude books as long as it was published at least 50 years ago. These publishings are public domain, so they are free and safe to use. Most Allstate etude books are available on this website, and both of yours are. So I would highly recommend checking that out so that you make sure that you download the correct music for the Allstate audition, and you don't have to worry about purchasing new books just for this one audition. I would also just make sure that you're paying close attention to the edition that is provided for your Allstate audition. This is tip number 2. It's important to play the music from the correct edition because different editions mean that you could be playing different dynamics or more often than not different notes. You don't want to arrive at the audition having practiced the music for hours to discover that there was a D flat in the edition that you are using that does not line up with the edition on your audition, or that does not line up with the addition on your audition panel. Those words are very similar, addition and audition. But my top tip for Allstate preparation is making sure that you prepare everything. If you're not feeling confident about the way that you're playing, remember that all parts of the Allstate audition are taken into consideration. If you're playing your etude very accurately but are not feeling great about your excerpts, as long as you're playing your etude accurately, that's going to improve your chances of getting into the Allstate Orchestra. I hope that this video was helpful for you, and please be sure to let us know if you have any questions. Thanks, and good luck on your Allstate audition.